Hi, how are you doing
I'm
today?
fine. You okay today?
I'm doing wonderful. I think it's getting hotter and hotter with this.
Oh, I do too. I feel like I ought to have a hat on today.
It really does. It's a good thing we found this little shady
Oh,
spot here.
this will help up here.
Look, we've been talking an awful lot in this tour about the churches in Frankfort. How did the churches get started here?
Well, I tell you, Barb, back in 1810, when Governor Charles Scott occupied the governor's office, there was a great need for churches because members at that time were meeting in their homes. So Governor Scott, along with a former governor named Christopher Greenwell, they got together and they urged the legislature to pass a bill to establish a church of public worship, or a house of public worship. It was to be open to and free to all denominations. So the trustees of Frankfort were empowered to go ahead and build the church by public subscription. But they only raised, Barb, just a very small amount. And for a time, even though they started the house of public worship, for a time the house of public worship remained vacant, not complete. So, in February of 1812, the legislature passed a bill to establish a lottery. Yes,
my
a
goodness.
lottery to raise funds to finish and build the church, not to exceed $4,000. Well, it was completed, and the first occupants of the house of public worship were the Baptists and the Presbyterians, and they got along fine for a while. But, you know, the old saying is, two's company and three's a crowd. So when the Methodists came along and asked that they be allowed to use part of the church, a controversy broke out, and it remained that way for quite a number of years.
Well, was the First Baptist Church the first church organized here in Frankfort?
They were the second. The Presbyterians actually organized in 1815, and the Baptists organized in 1816 with 13 members. Now, the House of Public Worship finally burned in 1825, and at that time, the Baptists then got together and they built a church at 314 Lewis Street behind Hudson's department store, and actually just about where the Capitol Art Gallery is located now. That was where the First Baptist Church was built. However, it finally burned in 1867. So in 1868, why, they came on around here and built this church. One of the interesting things is that one of the very early ministers here was a fellow by the name of Silas M. Noel. He was a fine man of Frankfort, and he also helped build Georgetown College over there in Georgetown, Kentucky. Also an interesting fact is that Porter Clay, a brother of Henry Clay, was also a minister of this house of worship, the Baptist Church. Also, I'd like to just add a little bit of a tidbit here for you I think would be interesting. I'm sure you've heard of Paul Sawyer, the great artist.
Mm-hmm. Seen some of his works in some of the houses we've been in.
Aren't they great, though? They're just tremendous. Well, Paul had a father. His name was Dr. Nathaniel Sawyer, J. Sawyer. And his mother's name was Ellen Wingate. And her mother's name was Penelope Anderson Wingate. And she gave to the Baptist Church the beautiful brick chapel here many, many years ago. So Dr. Sawyer and his wife actually lived up in Ohio for a while, and they had a very large farm. But since she was from Frankfort, Kentucky, she wanted to come on back home. So for a while they came on back home and lived down there on Broadway. But then as the doctor got older, while they sort of fell on hard times, so to speak. So when things got real bad for them, a committee from the Baptist church here went to them and said, look, we will gladly give to you rent-free for the rest of your lives the parsonage here. Isn't that nice?
Wonderful.
And they accepted, and they lived here from 1900 until 1908, when Mrs., the mother of Paul Sawyer, finally passed away. And he had a hard time with them because actually, while they were living here, his mother, Ellen Wingate Sawyer, she fell over a chair and broke her leg. And she never fully recovered from that. And the old doctor was in bad health, his father. So actually, Paul, for 8 years there, he had a hard time keeping things together. And he sold a lot of his paintings around town here in Frankfort. J. Pruitt Graham was one, and J.J. King was another that bought a lot of his paintings, and he painted quite a bit to help his mother and father get along. And I think that the Baptist church, we have to give them a little salute for helping out the mother and father of Paul Sawyer.
That's wonderful. That's a great story. I'm glad
You
told
like
us
that?
I do.
Okay, well, let's go on down to the Christian church, okay?
Okay, let's go. Well, we've gone quite a little walk here all the way down to the First Christian Church.
Yes. This is quite an historic church, Barb, really and truly. It was established in 1832. And the first minister was a fellow by the name of Philip Fall. Quite a famous teacher he was, but I think this is sort of an interesting tidbit on Philip Fall, the first minister. And that is, earlier he came to Frankfort and was a co-minister in a First Baptist, I won't say First Baptist, in a Baptist church. Then he went to Louisville and was a minister in a Baptist church in Louisville. Then they reorganized that church into the Christian church.
He got caught up in the reorganization then, huh?
That's right.
That's interesting.
So he finally came to Frankfort, and he was the first minister of the Christian church here for really quite a number of years. And actually, this church was made a little different from all of the rest of the churches. Did you notice?
Well, I noticed it has two different doors with a big wall in between.
That's right. You don't see any middle door, do you?
No, sir, no central door.
Well, in the early days, they had two doors. The Christian church had two doors. One, the left door was for the men to enter, and the right door was for the women to enter.
Couldn't get away with that now, could they? That's unusual. Is this the only
Yes.
type of church that had that?
I'm not sure about that, but I do know that the Christian church, when this early one was built, that's the way it was built.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it was a very fine church.
Well, we've made it down here to a nice, cool spot in front of one of the old state capitals.
Well, yes, I'm in the shade. I don't know about you.
It's pretty cool here, and looking at the water fountain over there makes it even better.
Oh, doesn't that look great? This is a great spot, Barbara. This is one of my favorite places here in Frankfort, the old Capitol building, you know. And really, we're sitting on the steps of the third Capitol building of Kentucky. You know that, don't you?
I realized there had been some that had burned, but I wasn't sure the exact number.
Yes. Well, the first one was a little bit different than this one, in that the first one, Barb, was built of rough stone. And on the first floor, they had, I believe, the treasurer and the auditor, I believe, was on the first floor. It actually, I forgot to tell you this, it was of 3 stories. And of course, the treasurer and the auditor, I believe, was on the first floor. And on the second floor was the House of Representatives, and also the Circuit Court, and also the Federal Court on the second floor. And the third floor, the Senate was on the third floor. And you know, you've heard the expression, the lower house.
Is that where it came from?
That's where it came from. The house was on the lower floor. See, the lower
interesting.
house. Isn't that interesting?
Very practical.
So, of course, the first Capitol that was built here was built mainly from funds and lumber and 1,590 perches of stone. You've heard that story when I told you about Frankfort being selected as the capital of Kentucky. So actually the people of Frankfort, you might say, almost entirely built the first capital out of their own funds and material that was donated in order to secure the first Capitol building here in Frankfort. And it was a real nice building. It wasn't too wide, but it was sort of tall, of course, since it was 3 stories high. And I think an interesting thing that you might be interested in is that on October the 15th, 1806, there was an article in the Western Recorder, which was a newspaper in Frankfort here. It openly accused Aaron Burr and others of conspiring against the United States. It just so happened that Henry Clay and Aaron Burr, they were good friends at that time. Aaron Burr was in Lexington, so when he heard about it, he hurried from Lexington over here because the grand jury had a special session and they asked, you know, where is Burr? Let's get him over here to answer these charges. So he came over here and said, I want an immediate investigation into the charges. And of course, his attorney was the great Henry Clay. After a bitter fight, why, the grand jury actually ignored the charges at that time. And the thing about it is, I thought you'd be interested in, where do you think that was held, that trial?
Is it held in the Capitol?
That's right. It was on the 2nd floor of the first Capitol building, because you remember I said that the circuit court and the federal court were on the 2nd floor. So it is true that that trial was held right here in the first Capitol building. And after the charges were ignored by the grand jury, they had a great ball down at the Love House for Aaron Burr, because he was quite popular with John Brown and others here in Frankfort who were their friends, because you remember he had visited here many, many times, and he even had purchased a lot down there on the corner of Washington Street and Main Street. Of course, at that time it was named Montgomery Street because they changed the name Montgomery to Main Street, of course, at that time.
When did the first Capitol burn?
Barb, the first Capitol burned in 1813. And almost immediately, they started building the second one. The second Capitol was built in 1814. In 1816, of course, it took about 2 years to build the second Capitol. The second Capitol was a little different from the first. The second Capitol only had 2 floors and an attic. At that time, the cost, they said, was about $40,000 to build the second Capitol. What they did, by a public subscription, they were able to raise about $20,000. You know where the $19,600 came from?
Where?
From the citizens of Frankfort. You know, they put up the
That's
money
wonderful.
again to keep the Capitol here in Frankfort, Kentucky. It was a little bit different, the second Capitol building, in that on the 2nd floor they had the House of Representatives and the Senate, both on the 2nd floor at that time. But the other state offices were detached. They had a brick building on the east side, and they had a brick building on the west side. The west side contained the Treasurer and the Auditor's office, and the Secretary of State and the Land Office was over here on the other side. Now, it just so happened that they had another fire. They had another fire in 1824, Barb, and it was a terrible thing. It burnt the thing to the ground.
How long had it been here between?
It,
Just about
it
10 years?
only been here about, the second one had only been here, say, about 10 years until it was destroyed. The second one was destroyed by fire. So in about 1827, actually was the date, the legislature again passed a bill appropriating money to build a third Capitol building. Now, there was a young man by the name of Gideon Shyrock. He was still in his 20s. He was an architect. Fine young man. He wasn't about to send in his plans for the third Capitol building. He didn't think he was quite good enough. But his friends urged him to go ahead and make some plans and send it in because there was a premium. Somebody was going to get a little prize of the ones that were accepted. Believe it or not, Barbara, this young he was in his 20s, Gideon Shyrock, he was the architect that won the competition. Isn't that just great?
That's amazing.
A young fellow like that.
And he almost didn't send them in.
And he almost didn't send them in. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
So this building was finally completed about 1830. It's 2 stories in here, and of course it had room for the Senate and the House on the second floor. And of course it's just great up there to see. They have been refurbished, completely remodeled not too many years ago. It had sort of gone into disrepair because at one time, while the Historical Society Library was in here, the offices of the Historical Society were in here on the first floor. But it was finally decided by the legislature that they would appropriate enough money to bring this building back just about the way it was in 1830, because you see this building was used until 1910, Barbara, when the new Capitol building was built and dedicated on June 1st, 1910. Also, they had those 2, you remember those 2 brick buildings that I was telling you about?
Mm-hmm.
One of them burned in 1865, and the other one was torn down in 1912 at a public auction. I guess they were going to use some of the materials from the building. So then in 1871, the legislature appropriated $55,000 to build this building over here, which now houses the Historical Society offices and the Genealogical Library up there on the top floor. So at that time, they built that building. They said it was going to be a fireproof building, this building over here.
Mm-hmm.
And it was also to be used by the Senate, the Kentucky Senate, and several of the other offices, but it was never used by the Senate or any of the senators. It was used by the governor and the Secretary of State right here in this building. The Secretary of State's office was in this corner room, and I'll have to tell you, you were asking about William Goebel, and you were asking about the marker there in the sidewalk, and maybe I should go down there and I'll tell you a little story about that, okay?
Okay, let's go down here. Now tell me about the spot that we're standing on.
Yes, Barb, I'll tell you just briefly. I won't tell you that whole story because it would take half of the day, you know. But to begin with, there was an election back in November of 1899. It was a bitter election because some people were backing the Republican. His name was William Taylor. He was backed by the L&N Railroad. And there was a fellow by the name of William Goebel that was on the other side, running on the Democratic ticket. It so happened that in the final results, Taylor, the Republican, was declared the winner of the election for governor. He was actually sworn in December of 1899. However, the legislature was controlled by the Democrats, and they had an election commission that actually Goebel had a lot to do with. So what they did, according to the reports of the day, is that the election commission finally met in January, and in canvassing the counties, it is said that they threw out quite a few of the counties where Taylor had a majority until it finally showed that Goebel had the majority. So, at that time, back on January the 30th, 1900, William Goebel and Mr. Chin and several people were walking up the walkway. They had come from the Capitol Hotel, I believe, and they were walking up the walkway, and all of a sudden there was a shot from one of the windows of the Secretary of State's office. Goebel fell right here by this marker. At that time, later, of course, they had a trial as to actually kill the Goebel, because I think I told you that after he fell, he was taken to the old Capitol Hotel. He was sworn in on his deathbed. He lived about 3 days, and then the Lieutenant Governor, J.C.W. Beckham, was sworn in as office, and I believe I'm correct in saying that he was the youngest governor ever sworn in as governor of Kentucky. It was really a sad day. As I've said before, they've had several trials. There was so much fever pitch of animosity against different factions that actually most of the trials were actually held over in Georgetown. The bottom line is that there was a fellow by the name of Henry Yahtzee. They said fired the shot. There was another fellow by the name of Jim Howard, who had killed a man previously. He claimed he was up here to seek a pardon. They never did really nail it down to who actually pulled the trigger, so to speak. But most of the historians feel like that it probably either was Jim Howard or Henry Yahtzee.
Well, did you tell me about something about legislators fighting duels?
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, you know the great Henry Clay. He was a member of the House of Representatives here. And there was another fellow a little older than he was by the name of Henry Yahtzee. And Clay was making a great speech about the fact that he thought that most people here in Kentucky should purchase only goods of domestic manufacture. And with that, why, Humphrey Marshall, who was a member also of the House, he jumped up and said, well, that sounds like the claptrap of a demagogue. And of course, with that, why, Clay challenged Humphrey Marshall to a duel. They did have the duel down across the river from Louisville. After the first shots, no effect. I believe it was the second shot with no effect. But on the third shot, Henry Clay was wounded in the leg. And for the rest of his life, why, he had that limp that stayed with him the rest of life. So yes, here in Kentucky, we had duels. Actually, they weren't supposed to duel in Kentucky, so they went across the river to Ohio.
From Louisville. That's right. Well, let's go inside the Capitol while we're this close.
Let's go inside. It's beautiful. I want you to see the spiral staircase, Barbara.
Okay.
Only one of its kind in the United States.
And it's air conditioned inside.
Oh, good. Barb, you know, we have been joined by my very good friend Carol McGurk, who's sort of in charge down here. But first of all, I want to let you know, I give a world of bus tours and walking tours of Frankfort, which I enjoy very much as a volunteer. Mm-hmm. I love history. And I always want to come down here to the old Capitol building. So much history here. And I always tell the people, okay, if you don't have much time, at least I want to show you the spiral staircase, which is one of the only kind in the United States. It's
wonderful.
Fully unsupported. A lot of people have told me, oh, I've seen one. I said, yeah, most of them that you've seen have wood steps, but these have stone steps. Now, my good friend Carol McGurk is going to tell you a little bit more about it in detail.
Well, tell me how all that works with the stone, how it stays up.
Thanks. The stairway is an arch. And first of all, it's stone that came out of the Kentucky River. It's what we call Kentucky River marble.
That's right.
Not quite marble, not quite limestone, but something really practical and easy to get in 1830 for Frankfort. But each step is separate. And they invented some kind of a wire saw with 16 blades, steam-powered, to cut the stone with. And each one just sits on top of the other. There's little notches, and there's no mortar. They probably had a scaffolding under it as they built it up. And then when they got to the top, they inserted that large keystone or top stone. So it's actually an arch with a keystone. And there's no mortar between it, and they're not attached to the wall. So pretty spectacular in Frankfort in 1830. It's just the weight and pressure of that top stone pushing down, holding them. In fact, the theory is if the walls were removed, stairs would still stand. And I really think that's true because I don't think the walls would be strong enough to support them.
Barb, I certainly have enjoyed another historic tour, a walking tour, or whatever you want to call it. It's just been great this afternoon. I'm looking forward, actually, the next time that we shoot any for your cable 10. You know where we're going?
Where are we going?
We're going to the old governor's mansion.
That should be wonderful.
That's the home of 33 governors of Kentucky.
There's a lot of history.
And I have a lot to say about that. And we're also going inside. I'm going to make arrangements with our good friend Carol McGurk to see to it that we can get in on a Thursday or a Friday afternoon, because there's a lot to see inside and outside both. I certainly have enjoyed being with you, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, sir. It's good to see you today.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.